My name is Linda. I'm 61 years old, and tonight I'm standing on a beach in Santa Barbara at my only daughter's wedding. The sky behind the ceremony glows with soft pink light as the sun dips into the Pacific, and I'm holding a glass of champagne that tastes more like nerves than celebration. The music hums gently in the background. Guests laugh over hors d'oeuvres, and the air smells faintly of jasmine and sea salt. I spent half the morning helping with the arrangements, and the other half reminding myself to stay in the background. That's what I've become good at over the years, being present but unseen. Sophie, my daughter, looks stunning in her lace dress, her hair swept back, her makeup flawless. She catches my eye now and then flashes a brief smile but doesn't come over. I tell myself it's because she's busy. I tell myself a lot of things to make them hurt less. David the groom approaches me just as the first string lights start to flicker on above our heads. He leans in close, too close for comfort, and speaks so softly, I almost think I misheard him. $40,000, he says, if I want to remain a part of their lives. Otherwise, he adds with a practiced smile, it might be easier for everyone if I quietly fade out. I blink once, twice, trying to process the words. It's not a joke. His voice is pleasant, almost warm, but there's something behind it that feels sharpened, practiced. Before I can say anything, Sophie walks over with a glass of rosé and a laugh that doesn't quite reach her eyes. She doesn't meet my gaze as she says lightly, or you could just enjoy the peace and quiet of a retirement community. Your choice, Mom. They stand there together like magazine models, polished, curated, untouchable. I glance at them, then at the crashing waves behind them. I feel something cold shift in my chest. Not rage, not even sadness. Something cleaner than that. I lift my glass slowly, savoring the stillness. You forgot one thing, I say, just loud enough to be heard above the sea breeze. My voice doesn't shake, my hand doesn't tremble. They don't answer right away. David looks confused, Sophie blinks like I've spoken in a foreign language. But for a split second, something flickers in their eyes. Uncertainty maybe, fear maybe. I see it and tuck it away quietly. I nod, excuse myself with a smile, and walk toward the restrooms, careful not to rush. I can feel the sand cooling now as the temperature drops. The champagne is warm in my hand, but I hold on to it for the weight. They think this is the end of something, but I know it's the beginning. The line I gave them wasn't a threat. It was a reminder, a signal, a door opening behind the scene they thought they controlled. It was a Tuesday night in Chicago, the kind of cold rain that makes the city feel like it's folding in on itself. The wind rattled the windows of our third-floor apartment while the radiator hissed like it was warning me not to move. Tom had passed out on the couch, one arm dangling over the side, his beer still upright on the floor, like some kind of threat that hadn't tipped yet. His rage had come and gone fast and loud and left my cheek burning. I kept one hand pressed there while I watched the clock blink 11:43 in pale green light. In the hallway, Sophie stood barefoot in her pajamas, her stuffed dog tucked under one arm. Her eyes were wide but dry, and that was the part that scared me most. She didn't cry anymore. She'd learned that silence was safer. She looked up at me and asked if we were going on an adventure. I nodded. My voice felt stuck somewhere deep in my chest, but I managed a yes. The biggest one yet. I moved quickly but quietly, like my body had practiced this moment before my mind had caught up. The duffel bag was already under the bed, half packed in secret during late nights when Tom was out. I shoved in Sophie's warmest clothes, the granola bars I'd hidden behind the cleaning supplies, and the hollowed-out copy of Jane Eyre that held $263 in fives and tens. The bruise on my side flared as I bent to zip the bag. I didn't have time to think about that. I pulled on my sneakers, grabbed Sophie's coat, and slipped the apartment key into the drawer where I kept the bills. I wanted to leave something behind that said I hadn't disappeared. I'd chosen to go. We crept past Tom's sleeping form. The TV still buzzed softly. I didn't look at him. I didn't need a final word or a dramatic goodbye. I just needed distance. The rain hit our faces the moment we stepped outside. Sophie clung to my side as we walked 4 blocks to the Greyhound station, the streets mostly empty except for taxis slicing through puddles. I told myself to stay steady. If I started crying, I wouldn't stop. At the terminal, the lights buzzed too bright. I bought 2 one-way tickets to Madison, where my old high school friend Kim had promised us a couch for a few nights. Sophie curled into my lap on the bus and fell asleep before we left the city limits. I stared out the window, water streaking down the glass, feeling like the skin of my old life was peeling off with every mile. I didn't know what came next, but I knew what we were leaving behind. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe we might be okay. The apartment was barely more than a room with a door. The linoleum floors curled at the corners, and the heater made a clanging noise every time it kicked in. But no one yelled there, and no one raised a hand. I found it after a week of sleeping on Kim's couch, a basement unit on the edge of town tucked behind a laundromat and smelling faintly of boiled cabbage. The landlord looked at me sideways when I asked if kids were allowed, but he took the deposit anyway. Morning started at 5. I'd walk Sophie to a neighbor who agreed to watch her for $10 a day, then catch the first bus to the diner on 3rd. I poured coffee, ran plates, scrubbed tables until my legs felt like they might give out. At 2, I'd grab a granola bar from my bag and change clothes in the diner restroom. The dental office job started at 3 sharp. I answered phones, filed charts, smiled through cracked lips until 9 every night. By the time I got home, Sophie was usually asleep on the mattress we shared. Her little body curled under the donated quilt, her stuffed dog tucked tight in her arms. She never cried out anymore, not from fear, but from peace. I'd sit on the floor beside her, my back against the peeling wall, and just breathe. Not deeply, not confidently, but without flinching. And that felt like a miracle. Money was tight. My shoes wore thin. Some nights I counted coins for bread and hoped the lights would stay on until morning. But there was safety in the silence. There was victory in the ordinary. The walls were thin and the windows didn't close all the way, but I'd wake before dawn to the sound of Sophie's even breathing and feel something warm start to return. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the beginning of a life that was finally mine. Sophie got into UCLA with a partial scholarship, and when she called to tell me, her voice was shaking with joy. She danced around our tiny kitchen holding the letter like it was made of gold. I remember sitting down hard in the one chair that didn't wobble, because my knees just gave out. That night I cried. Not because I was scared this time, but because I was proud. All the nights I scrubbed dishes with cracked hands, every double shift, every skipped meal, it all pointed here. She worked hard in school, studied late, and came home for breaks wearing heels and blazers I'd never seen before. She told me about her marketing classes, her professors, the friends she was making. Her words were quick and full of color, like her future had finally opened wide. Then one night near midnight, she called me breathless. She'd found a storefront on Melrose. Small but perfect, she said. Exposed brick, original hardwood floors, big front windows. She described it like she'd fallen in love. She needed startup money, almost 90 grand. It felt like a punch to the stomach hearing that number. But she wasn't asking from entitlement. She was asking like someone with a dream who still believed in her mother's magic. I didn't have the money in savings, but I had my retirement. Modest, slow-growing, carefully tended for decades. I had always imagined using it someday to travel or settle somewhere quiet, but that someday had never really arrived. Until now. The next morning, I called my old friend Martha, now a paralegal in Pasadena. She met me after work, still in her scrubs from her second job, and helped draw up the partnership agreement. 51% to me, 49% to Sophie. I didn't care about control. It was about protecting her, and me. Sophie signed the papers without blinking, barely reading them. She trusted me. We trusted each other. It felt like we were building something not just for her future, but for our shared past. The day the boutique opened, we wore matching blouses from a thrift shop and carried trays of Costco cookies on silver platters we borrowed from a neighbor. Guests trickled in slowly. We served sparkling cider in plastic flutes and hugged every single person who walked through the door. Sophie looked radiant. The shelves gleamed with carefully folded linens and curated jewelry. She moved through the space like it belonged to her. And it did. But it also belonged to me, not just because of the money, but because of the years that came before it. We were a team. She was the face, the brand, the charm. I was the support, the shadow, the steady hands. And that was enough for me. I believed it would always be enough. The boutique started getting attention a few months after opening. A local influencer posted a photo in one of Sophie's cobalt blue dresses and tagged the store. The next morning, there was a line at the door. Orders doubled, then tripled. Sophie hired part-time help and talked about expanding. I still came in late after closing to restock shelves and update spreadsheets. She never asked, but she never told me to stop either. She began dressing differently, sleek black trousers, heels that clicked sharp against the hardwood. She got her nails done regularly and started saying things like brand identity and quarterly targets. I didn't understand it all, but I was proud. I told myself, this is what progress looks like. Sometimes she'd toss me a tired smile when I left. You should come during the day sometime, Mom. It's different now. I'd just nod. This world wasn't built for someone like me, not anymore. One Thursday, I came by earlier than usual with Thai food in a paper bag. I thought it might be nice to surprise her, maybe even share a late dinner. The lights were still on and she was chatting with a customer near the front. I waited near the display of scarves, careful to stay out of sight. The woman, tall and stylish, was complimenting the space, asking how Sophie had done it. Sophie's laugh was soft, almost bashful. I built it from scratch, she said. Just hard work and a vision. No one handed me anything. I heard it so clearly, I felt it in my chest before my mind could even catch up. The bag in my hand crinkled as I turned to leave. My legs moved automatically down the steps and out onto the street. I walked 2 blocks before I realized I'd forgotten to breathe. Back home, I placed the food in the fridge like it might still matter in the morning. I sat down in the dark, coat still on, and stared at the clock. She hadn't lied, but she'd chosen to forget, and that was somehow worse. It was a Tuesday night, 2 weeks before the wedding. I had stopped by Sophie's apartment to drop off a folder of boutique invoices she needed for tax season. She wasn't home, but I still had the spare key she gave me years ago, back when things felt easier. The apartment was quiet, scented with eucalyptus candles and something floral I couldn't name. I set the folder on the kitchen counter and noticed her laptop open, beside an empty mug. The screen hadn't gone to sleep. A document titled, Wedding Planning, Final Edits, caught my eye. I told myself not to look. I told myself I trusted her. But something about the way my name sat there, bolded halfway down the page, pulled me forward. The section was labeled Family Integration. The bullet points were neat, concise, deliberate. Suggested placement seated near vendor area to reduce guest confusion. Avoid placing in central photos. Secure final contribution request before event date to ensure no delays. I read the lines twice, 3 times, hoping they'd shift into something else. But they didn't. One comment in the margin had David's name beside it. After the wedding, it'll be easier to phase her out without backlash. Sophie's reply was a thumbs-up emoji. My hand stayed still on the counter. The blood rushed to my ears, but I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stood there and let the facts settle like dust in the air. I closed the laptop gently and wiped a smudge from the counter that wasn't there. I walked out and locked the door behind me like it was any other evening. The wind outside had turned colder, but I didn't zip my coat. Back at home, I poured a cup of tea I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around the mug and stared at the wall where Sophie's second-grade drawing still hung. The paper had yellowed at the corners. The crayon hearts had faded. That night, I didn't sleep. I wrote no angry emails. I didn't call her. I made one call instead to my friend Diane, now a legal consultant in Westwood. I asked her a question I never thought I'd ask. What would happen if I exercised majority ownership of a company? Her voice was quiet on the other end. You could initiate an audit. You could shut down accounts. You could take back control. I said thank you and hung up. I wasn't ready yet, but now at least I knew what power looked like when it was mine. Martha's office smelled like coffee and old carpet, the kind of space that held more secrets than noise. She greeted me with a hug and a frown, already sensing this wasn't a social visit. I sat across from her at the scratched-up desk, my hands folded, my voice steady. I asked about majority ownership, what it really meant, what I could do with it if I ever needed to. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started listing rights like she was reading a menu. Audit authority, account freezes, the power to nullify contracts that weren't authorized by the majority stakeholder. If necessary, full operational control. I nodded after each item. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask how it would make Sophie feel. That part of me was quiet now, like a locked drawer I'd already walked away from. Martha leaned forward, watching me. You planning to pull the trigger? I shook my head. Not unless they give me a reason, but even as I said it, I already knew the reason had come and gone. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't here to destroy. I was here to remember who I was before they told me I was optional. We spent the next hour organizing steps, notices, timelines, what to do if it came to that. Martha moved with quiet focus like someone setting up a storm shelter while the skies were still clear. I thanked her, stood and let the silence stretch between us before I left. On the way out, she stopped me in the doorway. Just say the word Linda. I gave her a small smile. I will, but only once. Outside, the sun was low and the breeze sharp against my neck. I walked to the car with no music, no rush. I didn't need to act yet, but for the first time in a long time, I was no longer bracing for their next move. I was planning mine. The wedding was held at a private estate in Monterey, where the cliffs opened to the sea and the sky turned gold before dusk. Strings of lights stretched from the white tent to the edge of the deck, swaying gently in the breeze. A trio of musicians played soft jazz, the kind of music that makes people feel important just for being there. Guests mingled with flutes of champagne and polished smiles. The air smelled like roses and salt like beauty and distance folded into one. I wore a navy silk dress from a clearance rack and pearls I hadn't touched since Sophie's high school graduation. I kept to the side. That had become my place in recent years. A quiet corner near the floral arrangements, nodding at relatives who no longer remembered my name. Sophie looked beautiful, of course. Her gown flowed like it had been stitched from the sky itself, and her smile belonged to every photographer in the room. She walked among the guests like she'd been born for this moment. Maybe she had. David found me as the sun touched the horizon. He stepped close, holding a cocktail with a slice of orange and the kind of confidence that always came easy to men like him. His tone was pleasant, as if he were complimenting the hors d'oeuvres. 40,000. That was the number. Pay it or fade quietly from their lives. He didn't look at me as he said it. He didn't need to. Before I could speak, Sophie joined us. She didn't meet my eyes. She just smiled, took a sip of her wine, and said I could always consider one of those quiet retirement communities. Somewhere with good air and soft chairs. It didn't hit like a slap. It landed like a door clicking shut. Soft, final, inevitable. I looked at them both. Polished, glowing, untouchable. They looked like a magazine spread. They looked like strangers. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just lifted my glass and held it steady between us. You forgot one thing. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the sound of the waves like thread through fabric. They blinked just once, and in that blink I saw the tiniest crack. Not fear, not yet, but something close. I smiled, nodded politely, and said I needed to powder my nose. Then I turned and walked toward the tent. The hem of my dress caught in the wind. The air smelled sweeter away from them. The lights glittered above my head. The music shifted to something more upbeat. Behind me, the night went on like nothing had changed. But I walked past the tent and toward the edge of the property where the dunes met the deck. The wind picked up a little tugging at the edges of my shawl. I found a bench facing the ocean and sat down slowly, breathing in the cold air. My phone rested in my lap. One message, 4 words, sandcastle time. I sent it to Martha without hesitation. The sky was turning dusky pink, the waves breaking in soft rhythms below. Her reply came within seconds. Understood. Package is delivering now. Legal team on standby. Are you okay? I stared at the screen and typed back one sentence. I will be. From my seat above the sand, I watched the reception begin to ripple. The first envelope was handed to David's parents by the wedding coordinator, who moved with quiet purpose. They opened it with polite smiles that quickly faded. Across the lawn, other guests were approached. Some opened envelopes at their tables. Others stepped aside, confusion turning to concern as they read the printed words. Account holds, audit initiation, irregular fund activity. David's father rose first. He stood so suddenly his chair scraped across the wooden floor. Napkin still clutched in one hand, he crossed the lawn with long, angry strides, heading straight for the groom. I moved slowly, skirting the edge of the reception, watching without being seen. Phones buzzed. Murmurs grew louder. Rachel's boutique email, now under my authority, sent out automatic notifications to vendors and board members. Business activity frozen pending legal review. David was speaking quickly now, eyes darting, trying to contain something already far too wide. Rachel turned in slow confusion. Guests began checking their phones. The air shifted. Rachel spotted me then. Her expression froze. She walked toward me, voice low and brittle. What's happening? Everyone's getting these weird emails. Are you doing this? I looked at her gently. I'm exercising my rights as majority owner. David appeared beside her, color draining from his face. What have you done? I protected my investment. I kept my voice calm. Did you think I wouldn't notice the unauthorized investors? The missing funds. Rachel's eyes filled. We can explain. It was for a temporary venture, just to help David scale something on the side. I shook my head. A side project he didn't have the courage to pitch to his own father. David's phone rang. Rachel's buzzed. All around us, panic moved in quiet waves. I didn't yell. I didn't shame them. I simply stood still and let the truth take its shape. And then I walked away. No spotlight, no final word, just the sound of my heels against the deck steady and sure as the storm they invited finally arrived. David's father stood at the edge of the lawn holding the letter like it had burned his hand. His voice was low but sharp, slicing through the music as he pulled his son aside. They spoke in clipped bursts, their faces tightening, one furious, the other scrambling. Guests began drifting closer, their champagne forgotten. A few raised their phones, pretending to scroll, listening instead. Rachel looked from group to group, her hands shaking around her glass. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper, pleading. I said nothing at first. I let the silence speak for itself. When I did answer, it was simple. I've initiated a legal audit. I'm using my rights as the majority owner. There's nothing insane about it. David stormed across the grass, sweat at his collar despite the cool air. His voice was hard, quiet in a way that wanted to scare. You've humiliated us. You don't know who you're dealing with. I met his eyes and didn't blink. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. That's why I acted. He flinched just slightly and looked around, realizing too many were watching. Rachel came next. Her heels clicked across the deck, makeup starting to crease around her eyes. She asked me to stop, said it was all a misunderstanding. Her voice trembled on the word, we. I kept my tone steady. Everything you're watching right now is the result of choices you made. I only pressed send. Her breath hitched. I saw the weight of it land. Across the lawn, a man shouted. A woman pointed toward Rachel. The boutique's reputation had just become everyone's business. David's father held the document up to his son again, demanding answers neither of them had prepared. The air around us buzzed like static. I stood still, not smiling, not smug, just still, and in that stillness, everything broke open. Rachel caught up with me near the archway where the lights flickered slightly in the wind. Her breath came fast, her voice tight with panic. She grabbed my arm like it would anchor her to something steady. She called me mom again like she hadn't in years. The word cracked through the noise of the party, quiet but sharp. She asked me to fix it, to undo it, to help her just this once. I looked at her face. So familiar, still my child's face underneath the layers of makeup and fear. I remembered every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every shift I worked to keep her world whole. I remembered the boutique, her joy, her silence when I was erased from the story. I remembered the spreadsheet, the vendor table, the emails that made me a transaction. Her hand squeezed mine. She said we could explain everything. She said we were family. Her eyes shimmered like they had when she was 5, whispering about monsters under the bed. But now the monster wore pearls and used my name like a business asset. I looked at her and said softly, I already did fix it. You just didn't see it. She asked again, pleaded, promised. But it didn't land anymore. Not after what I read, not after what she allowed. I told her, she showed me what I meant to her. And now I believe her. Her mouth parted like she wanted to say something else, but nothing came. I turned. My heels were silent against the deck now. The voices behind me grew louder, but I didn't flinch. I didn't turn back. Each step felt like air returning to my lungs. Past the lanterns, past the guests, past the woman I used to be. I walked through the soft wind, out of the wedding, and into something that finally felt like mine. The new shop sat on the corner of a quiet street in a coastal town where the mornings came wrapped in fog and the afternoons smelled faintly of lavender. It had one wide front window, a blue-painted door, and a hand-lettered sign that read simply, Linden. The name felt like a part of me, soft but rooted. Inside, the shelves held small things, locally made soaps, dried flowers, handmade notebooks, linen scarves folded with care. I arranged each item myself. There was no back office, no investors, no one asking for numbers. Customers came slowly, kindly. Tourists wandered in, curious. Locals returned to chat, to browse, to thank me for staying open past 5 on Saturdays. I rented a small apartment above the shop. The floor creaked in familiar ways. The window over the sink looked out at the streetlight that flickered every third blink. I liked the rhythm of it. Each morning, I unlocked the door with my own key and watered the potted ferns by the front step. I played music low, something acoustic. Sometimes I sang along without meaning to. Some days I made just enough. Some days a little more. It didn't matter. The success wasn't in the cash register, it was in the silence, the kind that felt safe, not empty. I no longer checked Rachel's boutique site. I no longer refreshed email waiting for her name to appear. I had let that door close gently without slamming. The loss had space now, and so did I. There were small joys. A man who brought me fresh honey from his garden. A girl who asked if I could teach her to make pressed flower bookmarks. A woman who stayed 20 minutes just to sit in the lavender-scented air. I kept a notebook under the counter where I wrote one good thing each day, a kind word, a bird I hadn't seen before, the way the light hit the glass jars near dusk. I didn't rebuild a fortune. I didn't seek praise. I built peace on my own time with both hands. And for the first time in decades, no one could take that from me. One morning, just before opening, I saw her name in my inbox. The subject line was short, just, I'm sorry. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, the same kind I drank the night Sophie was born, jasmine with a little honey. I sat by the front window where the light always felt softest. The wind pushed gently against the glass like it was trying to remind me of something, but I didn't move. I read the email once, slowly, then I closed the tab and let my hand rest on the edge of the mug. Not all endings come with a reply. Some come with stillness, with the choice to feel something and let it stay right there. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for her to change. I had simply outgrown the ache. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't always about opening the door again. Sometimes it's about locking it kindly, then turning to face the sun, and letting it warm a part of you that no one else owns.